Hey everybody, so as I said earlier, this is one of my favorite events that we do every single year. So I just want to challenge you guys tonight is we have our three different students speaking to just focus. I understand that maybe you're like, I don't know him, I don't know her, but this is their story. This is the story that how God has been in their life, how he has not left them. And if you are a Christian in here, you have a story. And some of you may feel like, well, my story's not that great, but it's your story, and God's there. And some of you, you're like, I don't have a story because I'm not a Christian. And so I challenge you tonight to listen, because I think there's things from each and every one of these students that are going to come up here tonight that you can learn from, and you can see how God was there for them through some tough situations. And so our first student up is Clark Johnson. So let's give a big round of applause to Clark. And let's make sure we pay attention and listen.
Thank you, Robbie. I'm very excited to be here. Robbie can probably attest to this. For the past year, I've been begging him to let me speak at Fires and Flannels, even though I was just a sophomore and wasn't an SLT. To start off, my name is Clark Johnson, like Robbie said. I'm a junior at Central Fellowship Christian Academy. It's really cool to be speaking. I've been going to this church since like before this whole building was even built. So to be here speaking in front of you is a really cool opportunity. Just to get started, I have a question to serve as like sort of my basis of speaking tonight. And that question is like, why do you believe that God is real? Like, what is your purpose of belief in God? Like, I was talking with my aunt a long time ago, and this was at a time in my life that my foundation, like we just sang about, wasn't very strong, you know? And she had asked me, why do you believe in God? And it really just shook me because I didn't have an answer, and I was sort of realized that maybe I don't believe in God for the reasons that I should, you know? But yeah, just that's my question. I want you guys to be reflecting on that, and just as I share my testimony, just be thinking like, why do you believe in God, and how do you know that he's real, right? So just starting off, like I said, I've been going here for a long time, and just because I've gone here for a long time, I've had a lot of friends, and most of my friends were pastors' kids. So I just had a really tight community with a lot of the kids that were pastors' kids here. Had some fun times, some not so fun times here. But a big thing with me, and has always been me, is I'm a social person. I always cared about my friends and my family. Friends were a big part of my life, right? So just growing up, that's really what I had my identity in, right? A big thing, again, was my family. I love my mom, I love my dad, they're somewhere back there. I put my identity really in just the people that were around me. And that was good at the time, I guess. I had some fun, I was happy, I guess. But it's kind of funny because so like I was so deep in my identity with my friends just because they were pastors' kids, and I thought, well, maybe since I'm friends with them, I'm a good Christian. And it went so far that I even got baptized without really knowing what any of that meant. But just putting my identity in that was really bad. And it's kind of funny because almost like 3 or 4 months, well, you'll find out why it's funny, just trust, all right? The reason why, it's kind of funny because like 3 or 4 months after I got baptized, my parents sat me and my siblings down, and it's kind of awkward because like my parents were never big fighters, or like there was no really drama between them all the time. So we grew up watching that show, America's Funniest Home Videos. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but one thing they used to do is they used to show videos of kids like getting told they were going to Disney World. And so me and my siblings, when we got sat down for a family meeting, we thought my mom and dad were going to tell us that we were going to Disney World. Sat down, my mom and dad were crying. We're like, why are you crying? We're just going to Disney. And they were like, guys, we're getting a divorce. Divorce is not Disney World, guys. I'm gonna be straight with you. It's really not fun. But like I said, my friends were pastors' kids, and they were really spiritual. So for that, I was sort of outcasted, like right after the divorce, you know. And putting my identity in my family was really bad because I sort of lost my family in like the snap of a finger, you know. And so I lost my family in a sense. And then my friends were kind of thinking I was weird because they were all pastors' kids. They knew divorce was sinful and wrong. And so they're like, we don't want to be friends with the kid that has divorced parents and stop going to church because of all of that, right? So just that was really, really tough on me. And those were my foundations, right? Like that song we just sang. I sort of built my house upon the sand, like it says in the Bible, rather than putting it on the rock. But ever since that happened, like I just tried to find ways to escape. Like just tried to find ways to not really own up to my responsibilities or my problems. Whether it was like eating. Like some of you who know me for a while, I was a pretty chunky kid back in the day, right? So I put my identity in my friends and my family, and when I lost that, I needed some sort of comfort, and unfortunately my comfort wasn't God. So I would go to things like eating, or like hurting myself, or just like anything. Like I could go into the details, but I want this to be a happy story, right? Like I don't want this to be all depressing, like, oh, my life was so terrible. But yeah, so that's just really, I found every way to escape, whether it was eating or hurting myself or smoking or whatever it was that no one ever knew about because I was just so good at putting a face on. Like, I grew up with these pastors' kids. They knew how to play the game. I knew how to play the game. And no one ever really noticed. But, so that was all going around, like, when I was middle school. So, like, 7th grade was really bad. Like, I would gain, like, 50 pounds in a year. Was smoking regularly, like, not hanging out with the right crowd. Then 8th grade, my mom decided to move us to a school over in Macon called Central Fellowship Christian Academy. Represent, go Lancers, you know. No, but it was really different, like, just straight off the bat. Every Tuesday we have chapel, which is like pretty much just like a church service, right? And we had Bible classes, which is like weird because like I know for y'all that go to public school, like you would just every Friday you have FCA in the gym or wherever y'all meet. Bear Down, Hoko, I think y'all do it in like some like random room, whatever. At Bon Air we did in the gym, and like that was like a thing that was sort of like rare. Like you didn't meet to talk about God in a public school, but now I go to a private school where this is where you do every day. So every Tuesday, and in fact, like a couple weeks ago, we have this thing called Reformation Week, where the whole week is chapel services. And when I was in 8th grade, that was miserable. I fell asleep every single day, I'm not gonna lie. But that was just straight off the bat, so much different. And the more I learned about Bible and stuff like that, like I wasn't a very big fan of school. I wasn't a big fan of school, middle school. But Bible class was something I really enjoyed, and I liked my teachers. And that was the one class I paid attention to. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. So I just started asking some questions, getting to know my Bible teachers. They were sort of teaching me things that, like how to live my life for God, right? But I never really fully took that step because I like to be territorial about my life, if that makes sense. Like I wanted to give this part of my life to God, but I wanted to keep other parts. But it wasn't until like freshman year, I was sitting in math class, and my math teacher, super wise dude, he's a pastor, he was telling us this story. He's the greatest storyteller ever. Like, if you guys should really get a chance to hear one of his stories, it's awesome. But he's telling a story about, it's a long story, I won't really get into it, I probably don't have enough time. But he brought up a verse, like, into his story. And the verse was Psalm 37:4, which says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." And for some reason, that verse was like, I was like, there's got to be a catch to that, right? Like, that's not, come on. Like, it's harder than that, right? But it just really stuck with me. And there's certain things about the Bible, like the more I study it, were like those verses that either like make me uncomfortable and like convict me, or maybe ones that I just want to know more about. Like I'll just study those as much as possible. Surely you can't just be happy, right? Like I'd never found that, so surely it's not a thing, you know? But the more I studied that and the more I realized, and then I started going to church consistently again. But just a couple years ago, like freshman year, after I heard that verse, I was just studying it all the time. And I kind of took a second when I was just sitting alone with God, doing my quiet time, and I was just like reading that verse. And I just took a second, I was like, looked at my life, right? And to play some catch up here, because I'm kind of missing a few details. So freshman or 8th grade year, when I first started like studying the Bible, right? My parents, who were divorced, like I said earlier, that's why it's funny now, because they actually got remarried, which is crazy to think about. Like I've not heard a lot of stories like that, so I think that's pretty cool. But yeah, my parents got divorced, and then freshman year of summer, I decided to try and lose some weight because I was like, maybe I'm a little too big, you know? Ended up losing like 60 pounds, pretty awesome. But I was just sitting there in my quiet time, and I was just thinking, I was like, looking back at my life and certain like circumstances about my life, and it kind of all clicked at one time, and I was just like, this is what my life was like when I didn't follow God. And it was divorced, escaping, being depressed, all that sort of just godlessness, you know? And then when I was on fire for Christ, as someone might say, or like fully committed to Christ, that's when my parents got back together. I lost weight, like was actually happy in my life for the first time. And to me, like that's not a coincidence. So like to go back to that question earlier, where why do you believe in God? If someone today were to ask me, like, Clark, why do you believe in God? How do you know he's real? I'm a firm believer, you know, that archaeology, like history, science, all that points to God. But I maybe I should educate myself more on those things. I don't know everything about how the dinosaur bones prove that this and that, But no, I just would point back to my life, like when I was fully committed to God, doing everything for His glory, stuff started getting put together in a way that really just clicked and was all good for me and for God, most importantly, But that message that I just told y'all, like that verse, is sort of a slippery slope, which is, sorry, I can't say my S's very good. But no, you guys gotta understand, when I say this, I don't mean for y'all to be like, oh, well, I'm sad right now, so let me just go to God so I can be happy. That's not what I mean at all. And there's this quote that I heard a couple years ago, and it's actually like from TikTok, so maybe, and I have no reason to believe that the guy who said it's Christian, but he says, we should concern ourselves not so much with the pursuit of happiness, but the happiness of pursuit. Probably talking about something completely different, but I take that and I think it's completely applicable to us, because if we have a pursuit of God rather than a pursuit of happiness, like it might sound like I was trying to get y'all to do, that's where we find our happiness, because when we are fully committed to God, He makes our way straight, like He sets our path straight. He gives us all the things we need in our life, and pretty much, like, it's easy to want God's plans to be your plans, but when you're fully committed to God, your plans become God's plans. And that's something that I've seen in my life. And so, like today, if anyone were to come up to me later and be like, Clark, why do you believe in God? Well, I don't even have to answer that later, because this is why I believe in God, But like I said earlier, I really just want y'all to focus, why do you believe in God? And if you don't, like, come have a conversation with me. Either we can take a look back at your life and see where that's, if you've been fully committed to God, or maybe you just want to take that commitment, come talk to me, come talk to Robbie or Austin. But like I said, if anyone were to come ask me, look at your life, just take a minute to really think about when you were fully committed to God, what your life was like, how happy you were, and maybe if you've fallen off the cliff and just sort of, not following God as you should be, maybe that's why you're sad. Maybe that's why things aren't going anywhere. Maybe that's why you didn't make this team, or maybe that's why your relationship's not going good. If God's not in your life's not going to go good, right? But yeah, that's all I have, and I really hope y'all can relate to that and just look back at your life and just think, why do you believe in God? Just take that as Maddie and Jacob come up, listen to their stories, but also have in the back of your mind, why do you believe in God and how do you know He's real? I think that's it. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Clark. Clark, can I tell them about the first time that we met?
Yeah.
Okay, so like my first week working here at Southside, I was over in Ignition, and this was back when we had the old stage, okay? And so we speak, and then we play dodgeball, and I didn't know Clark yet, and I was talking to Catherine, and this guy comes up out of nowhere, and he goes, Catherine, look at this. And he sat on the end of the stage and ripped his shorts, clear. And so he comes over, he's like, man, look at this. So he ripped his shorts, and then he just went back out and kept playing dodgeball. So I was like, this kid's going to be fun to be around. He's a cool kid. So Clark, thank you for that. This next person that's coming up, I really don't even need to introduce her. But she's one of those people where when she comes in on Sunday night, and I'm not trying to put anybody down when I say this, okay? But she'll tell me sometimes, hey, I spoke at FCA, which, again, Clark said this, if you're at your school, I would highly encourage you to get plugged into your FCA. But she'll come in sometimes and she'll be like, I spoke at FCA. And it's almost like I go into this little kid mode of okay, well, what did you talk about? Because whether she knows it or not, and whether you all know it or not, you guys also teach us. Whether, again, if you know that or not, or maybe you're not even trying to, but you teach us just as much as we try to teach you. And so whenever she comes in and she's like, hey, I was speaking here or there, I'm like, this is good. I'm like, tell me what you said, And so I'm excited to hear her speak. So y'all give it up for Maddie Mules.
Hey guys. I don't really know how to follow after Clark. That's kind of hard. But if you would just pray with me, I'd really appreciate it. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity. I thank you that you leave the 99 and you left for the one sheep, and unfortunately that was me, God. And I just pray that you open up the eyes and ears and hearts of these people, Lord. I'm so grateful that they're in this room today, and I know that you will use them in your ways, Lord. Amen. Okay, so I heard this quote a really long time, kind of like Clark said on TikTok, but it says, you realize God is all you need when God is all you have. That's a perfect picture of what my testimony looked like growing up. I was baptized at the age of 8. I went to church mainly my whole childhood. However, my incentives for coming to church were not what they are now. They weren't for Jesus. I'd say my childhood was relatively normal compared to everyone else's. I went through trials as everyone does, but they didn't make a large effect on me at the time. My parents got divorced when I was 4. We moved and I thought the world was ending at 12, but none of these things I thought I needed Jesus for. In middle school, you're not really surrounded by people that are on fire for the Lord, and I wasn't either. For me and my friends, it was okay to bully people at school as long as you prayed before you went to bed. A lukewarm Christian is what I was, and I might go as far to say a fake Christian. I was playing the part and wasn't even playing it very well. So fast forward to high school, I was living like an average high school student. Now, I wasn't out drinking, smoking, or partying, but I definitely wasn't reading my Bible every night. I would still go to church on holidays, pray before I went to sleep, but I wasn't living for the Christian aesthetic. Or I was living for the Christian aesthetic and not the Lord, which is no better than the things I mentioned I wasn't doing. My sophomore year of high school, I got into a relationship that was not the best. This guy was not in any way a Christian, so obviously our relationship wasn't built on God. My faith still wasn't super mature, but we weren't on the same levels, or even close to it. Our relationship consisted of arguing every single day, impure thoughts and even actions, which eventually led to us splitting apart. Before we parted our ways, I knew God was telling me to break up with this boy for a long time. I didn't because I was comfortable. In fact, I even prayed that if God wanted us separated, he would do it because I couldn't on my own, which God did very evidently, might I add. I thought I could change this guy on my own and shape him into the man God had for me. I believe I found the chaos of our relationship comfortable because I didn't yet fully know the true peace of Jesus. Like I said, over the course of our relationship, I knew he was pulling me further from God, yet didn't act on that, didn't change that, which brings me to this. If the point of dating is eventually marriage, and the point of biblical marriage is to further the kingdom of God more, then why are we getting into unequally yoked relationships? If there is something in your life separating you from God, please leave it behind, because God is so much more. Jesus is worth more than everything you are afraid of losing. Drop everything at his feet. The fact of looking back now and knowing if I would have listened to God the first time, I could have missed out on so much heartache is crazy. Our breakup was rough and messy, but it didn't have to be. That year of not being with Jesus, the year of being outside of God's will, and especially the heartache that came after, never had to happen if I would have listened to the Lord in the first place. After this, I know I had 2 choices. I had come to a cross point. I could continue what I thought was Christianity, party every weekend, surround myself with bad influences, which I thought was all okay if I prayed before I went to sleep, or I could genuinely start following Jesus for who he really was, which, as you can see now, is what I chose. The next Sunday, I came to Collide. Actually, last Fires and Flannels was my first Sunday here. I heard one of my friends say that she could talk about God for hours, which I said I wasn't going to name drop, but it was Lena Ray. At the time, I thought that what she was saying was impossible. Yet now I'm in the same exact spot she was in, 1 year later, saying that I could now talk about God for hours. Like, I could literally run around the room because of what God has done in my life. My hardest trial became my greatest testimony. You see, I was done being caught up in the lukewarm form of Christianity and looking to others for approval. In the times of my heartache, I didn't understand what God was doing or why he had to make it so hard, but I had to be shown I couldn't do it on my own. I didn't understand why I couldn't eat, why I was numb to any emotion, and why I had to be forced to get out of bed every single day. I couldn't understand what God was doing, but I had to be shown I couldn't do it on my own. I had to be shown that Jesus was more than a relationship, more than a boy, and I had to be shown I needed him. In Mark 4, Jesus speaks a sermon and later asks his disciples to go across the sea with him. This was their cross point, their fork. They could follow Jesus to the boat and into the sea, or they could say no, So one thing I want to add is that the disciples had only 2 choices, to get on the boat or stay on land. Jesus' boat didn't have like a float hanging on the side, so you could choose both. You were either in the boat or you weren't. You're either with Jesus or you're not. So fast forward, disciples got on the boat, on the boat. So, hold on. While they're at sea, a huge windstorm happens, making the waves crash over the boat. During the storm, Jesus was, as it says in Mark 4:37, in the stern sleeping on the cushion. The on the cushion context is taken as Jesus was napping. Because, if they would have said he went to bed, meaning he was tired, they would have said a bed. But they said on the stern, meaning a couch, which means he was taking a nap. The devil wants us to take this as Jesus had not a care in the world, that his disciples were scared, and that he was just a little tired. The devil wants us to take this as Jesus was absent in their trials, which we might think quite often. Google tells us that the definition of napping is sleeping lightly or briefly, which we don't or shouldn't do when something important is occurring. Jesus napping doesn't mean he didn't care, but shows us he had full control of the situation. Sleeping equals comfort, which ultimately, for Jesus, equaled authority. Jesus had no fear of the storm because he knew he was bigger. He knew he had full control. God was not absent to his disciples, but was right behind them, in full control with full authority, which we must believe in our own lives. When our windstorms arise or our boats begin to fill, we must look to Jesus. Bad times force us to trust in something larger than ourselves, because that's when we learn we are untrustworthy in the responsibility of ourselves. I started following Jesus at this point in my life because he was my only hope. I could put motivational quotes on my mirror and get into another relationship right then. I could not get on the boat with Jesus, but ultimately, God was the only one that could turn my situation for good. God showed me in this season especially how temporary worldly things are. I was so blinded by these worldly things and relationships that I had lost sight of Jesus. Jesus never moved. I drifted. I moved. I began to idolize myself over Jesus and his will, and the result of that was my heartache. This world is cruel and ever-changing, which is why I don't put my hope in it anymore. The Lord is never changing and always faithful, which is why I put my hope in him. Following the Lord didn't make my problems go away, rather than give me a hope that they could one day be resolved or turn into something bigger. Just as the disciples getting on the boat with Jesus didn't mean they wouldn't face a storm. In fact, very recently, oh my goodness, I struggled deeply with my health. I was losing 12 pounds in 2 weeks, couldn't eat full meals, and couldn't go a day without at least 2 naps. I had questions and my doctors had no answers, and I was doubting God and I felt like a hypocrite. I was on Instagram telling others not to fear because Jesus has control, which is completely true, but I wasn't taking my own word. I wasn't walking my talk. I was in fear. Homeward, a song I like, says in the chorus, I've learned faith isn't fearless, it's just trusting when you feel the most. My fear was not a sin to Jesus. My thought of going through it alone was. I still struggle with many trials, but I know I don't struggle alone, because I know God is still in my boat. The whole point of this story isn't that God is good now and everything's all right. God's presence and character was never changing throughout the course of my life. God never left my boat, and he was good in the storm, and especially in the storm. Matthew 7:25 says, the rain fell, the rivers rose, the winds blew and pounded that house. Yet it didn't collapse because its faith was on the rock. God is my only firm foundation. He is my only rock. He is what my hope is in. I don't fear the future anymore because my eyes are shifted from my trials to the one who held them. My eyes are shifted to Jesus, and I hope yours will be too.
Thank you, Maddie. Do you want this water? That you didn't take a sip of? I'm just kidding. Anyway, I love what she said. She said, I knew I was going through a trial, but I knew I didn't have to go through it alone. And that is so true. There have been times in my life when I have been in exactly where Maddie has been. And I've just thought, man, like I'm going through this alone. And it's been in those moments when God has brought people around me and caused somebody to send me an encouraging text or something like that. And I've just been able to say, yeah, I'm not alone, right? And I want you to know, like, if you're in here tonight and you feel like you're going through a storm, that you are not alone. And I want you to know that we are here for you, and we love you, and we're always here for you. And so you can always feel like you can come talk to us here at Southside, because we want to be a church that walks with you through the trials of life, right? Like that's what the church ultimately is supposed to do, is be for one another, and we want to do that. So I just want you to know, if you're in here and you're in the exact same place that Maddie's been in, I want you to know you can trust us. You can trust your small group leader. You can trust your pastor. You can trust whoever it is around you, and you can trust and know that we're going to come alongside you in those moments. And so thank you for that, Maddie. And we got one more guy getting ready to come up here and speak, one of the most genuine guys on the planet. And every time I talk to him, he's always happy, and he's got joy, and he's never sad. He always has joy and a big smile on his face, and he's got one right now. So would y'all help me welcome Jacob Schofield.
Hey, shout out to Austin and Robbie out there. They're amazing leaders. My name is Jacob Schofield. I go to Houston County High School. I'm a senior there, and I'm going to be telling you on how Jesus changed my life. As I was growing up, faith was something that always played a huge role in my family's life, which regarded me to asking questions regarding faith. Around the age of 10, I never really understood Jesus or how things worked in the Bible, which led me again asking more questions. Around the age of 12, my parents would constantly get me, or try to get me more involved into church, but I thought I was perfect right where I was with my faith and didn't want to branch out to meet new people. Fast forward to around the end of 7th grade, I figured I would give my middle school youth group a shot called Ignition to see how it was because some of my friends were in there. As I soon entered through the doors, I was greeted by the most kind leaders there, which made me feel welcome week after week. As weeks and weeks went on, I would constantly go to Ignition and enjoy every week I went there. After a couple of months have passed, Southside was talking about Fields of Faith, and all my friends were interested in it, so I joined along with them. As we arrived at Fields of Faith, it was packed with about 1,000 people there, and normally with a lot of people there, I tend to break down and go into panic attacks. Once we arrived at Fields of Faith, we were sitting around with our friends, and they were playing worship music, and I felt a pull by the Lord that night. And towards the end of the night, they asked people to come down to the field if we accepted Christ into our hearts this night. I was hesitant on going down to the field, but I felt a pull by God to walk down to the field, knowing that this was the best decision of my life. As I was leaving the field, I was overflowed with emotions, knowing that this was the moment that I truly realized Christ was in my heart. Around a year later, my faith wasn't so consistent nor strong. Consistency is such a strong word with faith, that I didn't know at the time. Oftentimes, I would let my anxiety overtake my faith, which was never acceptable. It led me to question God and His promises. Constantly, at this age, I would have numerous amounts of panic attacks because of my anxiety that I struggle with. Going into 10th grade was when COVID was real big, and this was when I truly started falling down a spiral of sin, such as lustful sin. At this point, God wasn't very present in my life, and I stayed buried in my sin. When COVID finally let back up a little, they allowed our high school youth groups called Collide to be back in person. And I was super excited to be back, but my faith was still very shallow. Weeks after weeks, I would continue to fall in love with the Lord and started putting my faith over my fear. Eventually, I would get to the point where I wanted to be more involved with my church and go to our summer Christian camp called Passion. My faith at this time was on fire for the Lord, and it went along for about a year until the day October 7th, 2021 came along. I got home this night around 11 o'clock p.m. and all I heard was my parents arguing, but I thought it was a normal day with the arguments. But the arguments this time were a lot worse. I was a little concerned, but chose to stay in my room until things got real loud. I walked back to my parents' bedroom, and all I heard was a loud bang, knowing that something real crucial just happened. My father passed away this night by suicide. Deep depression and sadness overdriven my heart, and the only question I had was, why God, why me? Nothing but hatred filled my heart as the night went on, and still constantly, I would question God's capabilities. I woke up the next morning with only about 3 hours of sleep and still hatred on my heart. But I got my daily Bible verse notification on the app and felt some pull to read it in some way. And the verse read, "I've told you things so that in me you will have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." John 16:33. At this point, I didn't care about the Bible verse at all and had no care in the world to comprehend the verse, especially not knowing that this verse one day will be the puzzle piece that I was missing. Weeks and weeks went on, and the reality of me not having a father truly settled in. From this point on, for about a month, nothing but suicidal thoughts and anxiety filled my mind, and all I thought was, it is my fault that my dad is not here. I would begin to fall into unfulfilling temporarily pleasures to keep my mind off things, and my ignorance for God has grown tremendously. From the time span of November 2021 to June 2022, faith was something I always put second instead of first. I would often put more worldly things over it, and I would continue to stay on the same path, but I was still involved in my church week after week. until Passion 2022 came along. I thought this would have no change in my heart and leave me going down the same path and have zero output on my life. But on the last morning session, we had Pastor Grant Partrick, and the same verse that I shared earlier, I have told you things so that in me you have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. John 16:33. Pastor Grant explained it in the sense of me understanding the verse, and have a different perspective on it. In the middle of him praying, he said this: Jesus, get me out of the storm, but if you're trying to teach me more about you, keep me in the storm to learn about you. This part in the prayer has stuck with me ever since, and it truly made me look at the verse, John 16:33 differently. With my thought process behind this verse is that Jesus works in mysterious ways, and he takes the light out of the darkness. And it wasn't a coincidence that he put this Bible verse on my phone, but a blessing. From then on, my relationship with the Lord has grown tremendously, and is the reason why I am here now, but I know he's not done with me. Thank you.